Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be looking at what is Ordo Amoris? Should we love some neighbors more than others? So, in this video, we're going to be looking into a concept in Catholic philosophy, Ordo Amoris, or order of love. This has come up in a recent debate as American President J.D. Vance has tried to justify deporting migrants and illegally withholding life-saving foreign assistance to countries around the world by saying that the Christian thing to do is to prioritize your own country first. In this, Vance, a Catholic, called upon the concept of Ordo Amoris, or order of love. Pope Francis responded with a scathing rebuke of this interpretation of Catholic doctrine. So, in this video, we're going to do a couple of things. First, we're going to look at the concept of Ordo Amoris as initially created by Catholic philosopher St. Augustine and discussed and expounded upon by St. Thomas Aquinas to see whether the Pope or the Vice President has a more accurate interpretation of this just based on the philosophy. Second, we're going to look at the validity of this concept itself and potential secular justifications for this from various ethical theories. We're not going to look at Max Scheller's Order Amoris in this video, as that's an importantly different concept that goes by the same name. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. Maybe we'll do it in a future video. So, Vance claimed that Christianity mandates a hierarchy of love, that one should love one's family first, then one's community, then one's country or nation, and then the people outside that nation in that order. This, to the Vice President, justifies deporting migrants and shutting off life-saving foreign assistance, which does remain shut off despite waivers and judicial orders to the contrary. As some of the worst in the U.S. foreign assistance for the U.S. government, I have a lot of opinions on this. They're going to need to await another video. For now, understand that regardless of what you hear, the assistance does remain shut off. Pope Francis issued a rebuke of these comments, stating that Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. The true Ordo Amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan, that is, by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception. Now, these are clearly competing views of Christianity, what it is to be a good Christian. Now, I'm not a theologian, and I don't know what the accurate interpretation of Christianity is, or if there even is an accurate interpretation out there. If an accurate interpretation of a religion is something that is even cogent. However, the concept was initially created by a philosopher and theologian, St. Augustine of Hippo. Augustine argued that everything should be properly ordered, including love. Unlike Vance, the top of Augustine's list is God. Vance started with family, he did not start with God. For Augustine, there are two kinds of love, charity and cupidity. Charity is properly ordered love that's centered around God, while cupidity is perverse love centered around oneself. Ordo Amoris, therefore, for Augustine, means that one should love God first and then love other things. So, there is a debate about how exactly to interpret Augustine's comments about loving one's neighbor. However, it is clear that his ideas of love do not stop at national borders. For Augustine, while the Romans were good to their countrymen out of fear of punishment, Christians should love everyone because they love God. Loving others, for Augustine, should not be driven by the state or stop at national borders, but rather should be based on a love of God and therefore a commitment to the good of all. Now, here's a quote from Augustine that about the heavenly city, where he makes the case that love should transcend place and nationality. This heavenly city, while it sojourns on earth, calls citizens out of all nations and gathers together a society of pilgrims of all languages, not scrupling about diversities in manners, laws, institutions, whereby earthly peace is secured and maintained. Augustine says that all men are neighbors to one another and argues that we should love our neighbors. He does say that while we should love all our neighbors equally, we may limit ourselves to doing good, acts of good, as opposed to kind of a feeling of love, to those that are near to us physically out of a matter of practicality, but not a matter of principle. It is not a fact that we don't help everyone in the world because we shouldn't help them, or because people that are far away from us are less deserving of our love, but rather because practically we can't be giving and supporting and providing charity to everyone in the world. Rather, we can provide charity to those that are close to us. This is a practicality that in some ways is rendered moot by our modern world, where we can send money around the world, almost anywhere in the world, without leaving your home. Now, it still precludes you from giving charity to everyone in the world, but it could allow you to give charity to anyone in the world. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But before we go that, let's talk about St. Thomas Aquinas. So Aquinas lived nearly 1,000 years later, and he expands on Augustine and takes a slightly different approach. He argues that in doing acts of good, we grow to love and feel greater affection towards those we benefit. And therefore, because we're only doing good to those that are in a certain amount of proximity to us, we may not merely do more good to them, but feel greater affection towards them. And therefore, we may grow to feel greater love towards those that we're able to do good towards than those we are not. It's important to note this does not absolve us of feeling love towards everyone, including those we do not know, but rather excuses this inequality of affection, this inequality of love, because you may feel more love towards those that you're actually doing good towards. For Aquinas, we can and should love those that are closely connected to us more, and love those that are our blood relatives even more. Within this hierarchy, he says that one should love God first, then one's father, then one's mother, then one's children, and then other members of one's household. However, it's notable that there's no hierarchy of nationality here. He isn't saying that you must love citizens of your country more than citizens of other countries. And there is no excuse to not love some people at all, merely an allowance to love some more than others. There's no allowance to love those from the same country or nation more than others. So, who captures the original concept? Arguably, in some ways, neither of them. Let's take a look at Vance first. Vance is correct that some philosophers interpreted an Ordo Amoris to mean a hierarchy of love, where some people are loved more than others. This is arguably more in Aquinas than Augustine, but it's a little bit in both of them. However, this is based on proximity and familial ties, not national origin. And it still requires you to love everyone. It simply allows you to love folks in different amounts. In other words, if we were to truly follow Aquinas, you should love the undocumented immigrant living right next door to you more than another American living down the street or in another state. Because Aquinas and Augustine are talking about the love that you're giving is to the people that are close to you, that are physically in your community, because it's more practical to give them support. Many interpretations of Augustine would take this even a step further and say you should love all of these people equally, and the only reason you would give more to some and not others is practicality. You are able to give more to those that are physically closer to you. Something that would say we should be giving more towards those undocumented immigrants that are living next door to us than even Americans that are living further away. Though arguably this physical closeness is a constraint that is no longer fully present in our modern world. And so who should we be giving the most to? Perhaps it's those that have the most need, as we'll talk about later. Now, looking at the Pope's interpretation of this, the Pope is right that the teachings of Augustine and Aquinas provide that we should love everyone, period. But his view and his piece does gloss over the fact that some of the orderings of love are present in these teachings. There are orderings of who you should love more and less. But he's right that the teachings of Aquinas and Augustine say we should love everyone, and that they do not discriminate based on national origin. So, taking a step back from the history of philosophy, what should we do? A Catholic might be convinced by the arguments presented by Aquinas and Augustine that are rooted in Scripture. But what about the rest of us? Do you have different levels of ethical responsibility towards people who are citizens of the same country as opposed to citizens of a different country? What about people you see every day versus those that live on a different continent? Well, this is a big question in ethics, and it's a huge point of contention between two of the biggest ethical theories of deontology and consequentialism. Many deontological theories claim that you do have special duties to those that you are closest to, your parents, your children, your spouse, etc. Kant famously does this. While many consequentialist theories, on the other hand, claim that you have a duty to do the most good in the world regardless of your relationships with those individuals. Peter Singer famously makes this argument. Though even some of the hardest consequentialists claim that this duty is very hard to fulfill at times. Peter Singer also famously says it's very hard for him to think of fulfilling this duty to not care for his elderly mother, even if those resources could be better spent caring for others. However, these theories are usually focused on the family, your very close, immediate connections and community, as in many ways, Augustine and Aquinas are focused very much on the family, though they do talk a little bit about neighbors more broadly and some of that proximity. But a lot of these theories are saying that people you have this real deep special responsibility towards are those in your family. I think even these theories would struggle to justify a special duty to those with certain citizenship papers over others. You have a deep ethical duty once someone has a green card, but not if they have a temporary visa. They also expose the fact that due to global inequality, it is much cheaper to help those in poor countries than those in rich ones. And even the poor in the US are doing much better than the poor in Sudan, for example. This means that even if you love those in your own country the most, you can still make a huge difference in other places that are poorer while providing only a fraction of the resources that are invested back in your own country. You can still give the vast majority of your resources to your next door neighbor, to people that are in your close community, while having a huge impact on people in communities around the world because of inequality. So, what are some other explanations of reasons we might think you have a special duty towards those in your own country? Well, perhaps we're talking about patriotism. It's not about overall ethics, but it's about the particular virtue of patriotism. We have a whole series on patriotism if you're curious, but we'll take a couple different versions of it. So, liberal patriotism claims that we have special responsibilities to people within our country, and we have general responsibilities to all people. We have responsibilities to protect and defend the rights of everyone, but we do also have some special responsibilities towards those within our own country or our own community. This might provide an explanation of why we think that there is more that we should be giving back to those within a particular country or nation. Instrumental patriotism claims that these responsibilities are required, those special responsibilities towards people within your country are required not as goods on their own, but rather because they are instrumental in creating a community, creating a country, creating a sense of identity. And that is in itself a good thing that provides stability. It provides people with meaning and belonging and happiness. And therefore, we should have these responsibilities not because something is inherently better about the people that are in our country versus some other country, but because in having those responsibilities, in caring for each other, we create something greater through a country and a community where people have this greater sense of belonging, a more cohesive nation. Now, these all might justify spending more on Americans than on those abroad in our national budget, for example. But to go back to the reality of this, we already do that, with 99% of the budget going to people in our own country and only 1% of it going in foreign assistance. And even a lot of that 1% is captured in the government buying food from farmers in the US to then give it abroad. And so a lot of that actually stays within the country still. It seems that if we have any duty to those in other countries, even if it is much smaller than the duty to people here, we should still be giving. We should still have some duty to others, even if it's a smaller duty, even if it's a smaller amount of love that we're giving. Additionally, it's hard to formulate patriotism as a responsibility towards your neighbors who have a certain set of papers, but not a different set of papers. This idea of patriotism as you only have this responsibility towards creating a community once someone has passed a particular bureaucratic hurdle seems challenging in many ways. If anything, we should be trying to bring those people into the community of our nation sooner and quicker, to bring them in and making them a part of the broader community. If we're going with the idea of instrumental patriotism, that there's something good about creating that community, we're harmed, if anything, by keeping those people separate. Now, there are other concerns we could raise. Perhaps there are issues with the efficacy of foreign assistance. I have made this argument myself on several occasions. When the people you are trying to help do not have any oversight over the programs you are providing, those programs can end up doing more harm than good. However, this is not so much an argument against any charity or foreign assistance, or trying to do good for those or love those in other countries at all, but rather it's a case against doing it poorly or ineffectively. There are ways that assistance creates dependence and does more harm than good, but there are ways to mitigate those risks, and there is some development assistance that does good work and humanitarian assistance that does good work. Reform is centered around the idea that we should do something, but we just want to do it right. That's not what the case Vance is making. The philosophical position that's being promoted by Vance is that we should not be doing anything, as evidenced by the fact that all foreign assistance has been frozen. So, one concern that's raised by Aquinas and Augustine that might give us reason to give more to some people as opposed to others is practicality. You might have the affect of love, the feeling of love towards all, but you might not be able to practically give money or support to everyone. The idea is therefore that you cannot give to everyone in the world, so as ought implies can, you can't be required to give to everyone in the world. However, this then raises the question, if we think that you must pick a subset of humanity to give to, how should you pick this? Many Christians argue you should give to your immediate neighbors first. Some justify this in an explanation of saying that God put those neighbors next to you and therefore they're deserving of your support, though anyone that's not Christian isn't going to be particularly convinced by that argument. But in the world of technology, Augustine and Aquinas' justifications for not giving to someone very distant from you seem to fall flat. There can still be the case that you can't give to everyone, but there's not this case that you can't give to anyone. And in fact, we are aware that charity could go much farther in poorer places. $1 in the United States is very different from $1 in the Gambia. Consequentialists argue that you should give to those where your money will have the most benefit, where you will do the most good. This is often, concerns about efficacy notwithstanding, somewhere far away. And so even if we accept the point that you may not be able to give to everyone out of concerns about practicality, this doesn't mean you can't, with our modern technology, and certainly with the tools of a government, give to anyone, and particularly target those that would most benefit from it. In the end, I don't know if there should be a hierarchy of people you have a duty to. But it is important to note that while many of these theorists here argue that you might have less of a duty to help those that are further from you, or perhaps in the case of utilitarianism, those that are better off, none of them claim that you have no duty to help them or no duty to love them. No one is making the case that you have no duty to care for or love people from different countries. Aquinas and Augustine make this clear. It does raise the question for the current administration. If we love ourselves, the people within our country, with 99% of the funds of the government, can we really not spare 1% to love others? What do you think? Do you agree with Vance's assessment of Ordo Amoris? What about Pope Francis's, Augustine, or Aquinas's? Is there one of those that you particularly like, or do you have a different version of kind of the order of love that you think people should follow? Perhaps you're a consequentialist and you think the order of love should go from those that have the greatest need. Do we have the same duty to our fellow citizens as we do to people in other places? What makes that duty different? Is it physical proximity? Is it our blood relations? Is it citizenship? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.